Permanent Subcommittee on Investigation will come to order. Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Whitaker, for being here today. Thank you to my colleagues who have joined us. Just over 5 years ago, Boeing and the FAA were thrust into the spotlight, unwelcome but inevitable, when two Boeing 737 MAX aircraft crashed in less than 6 months, killing 346 people. The aftermath of those crashes raised troubling questions about the role the FAA played in overseeing and approving changes to the design of Boeing aircraft. Americans were assured by the FAA that problems with Boeing's aircraft were addressed when the FAA allowed the MAX to return to the sky in November 2020. Yet, just over 3 years later, this January, a door plug blew off a Boeing 737 MAX mid-flight. That incident is seemingly indicative of a broader systematic set of issues that the FAA still has not addressed. Our subcommittee began its inquiry into quality and safety practices at Boeing 8 months ago, following whistleblower allegations that shortcuts have been taken during the manufacturing of Boeing's 777 and the 787 aircraft. Today's hearing is our third as part of this ongoing inquiry, and it's a critical step in understanding how the FAA's oversight of Boeing has or has not compelled Boeing to address the fundamental flaws in its safety culture. And we have said it is a safety culture that is broken, that Boeing has put profits and speed of production ahead of quality and safety, and ultimately that failing is at the core of its current difficulties. In June, the subcommittee released new findings detailing concerns from whistleblowers, including about Boeing's ongoing mismanagement of non-conforming parts and removal of quality inspections. Today, we have released a new memorandum that reveals previously non-public information about very concerning practices and procedures still occurring at Boeing. This memo reveals that many of Boeing's employees still feel pressure to prioritize speed over quality, raising serious safety concerns. And this survey is illustrated behind me. According to it, conducted by Boeing in May, I should emphasize conducted by Boeing, quote, schedule pressure is still significant. The survey found that 1 in 3 Boeing employees said that schedule pressure may cause their team to lower its standard. That is a profoundly disturbing finding. The memo also reveals that FAA found more than 100 alleged instances of non-compliance with federal regulations and Boeing's own procedures as part of a special audit examination of Boeing and its supplier, Spirit Aerosystems, after the door plug blowout. The FAA found alleged non-compliance across multiple crucial stages of the production process. For example, the FAA found that, quote, Boeing is failing to ensure many of their employees have the appropriate education, training, skills, or experience to effectively perform their assigned tasks, end quote. Your report. The FAA also found that numerous instances of Boeing struggling to track and store non-conforming aircraft parts. This isn't about just storing parts correctly. It's a process that's critical to ensuring that these non-conforming parts don't make their way into airplanes. And now, as the subcommittee reported in June, deficiencies continue to plague Boeing's quality inspection procedures. In some facilities, Boeing personnel are allowed to inspect their own work. Let me repeat. in some facilities, Boeing employees actually inspect their own work. The FAA has acknowledged to the committee or subcommittee that this practice appeared to pose an inherent conflict of interest. Yet, the program has continued. The findings by this subcommittee today show that, in fact, not much has changed at Boeing since 2018 and 2019 when the crashes occurred. The findings about actual practices show that Boeing continues to prioritize the speed of production and profits over safety and quality, and the Department of Justice has taken action which reflect the potential criminality of those practices. In my view, the agency has to be proactive and aggressive in oversight, not reactive. Now, more than 5 years after the tragic 2018 and 2019 crashes, the same questions persist about what the FAA is doing to ensure that Boeing is properly designing and building its aircraft. Under your direction, Mr. Whitaker, the FAA swiftly reacted to the door plug blowout earlier this year, but clearly more significant reform is needed. For example, the FAA issued a rule requiring Boeing to implement a safety management system, SMS, earlier this year. The FAA is giving Boeing 3 years to fully comply, despite the fact that Boeing first agreed to implement an SMS as part of a settlement with the FAA nearly a decade ago. Prioritizing safety must permeate every aspect of the company. Without a culture that genuinely prioritizes quality over profits, safety over speed, and transparency over the bottom line, Boeing simply cannot succeed as a company. And that's becoming more and more apparent with time. The FAA's oversight of Boeing and its safety culture as a strong, independent regulator is an essential part of the company's success. Its own success depends on the FAA being strong in its scrutiny. And that means the FAA must heed Boeing's deeds, not their words, and do more to scrutinize Boeing's safety practices. It must review its process of delegating critical authorities to Boeing through the Organization Designation Authorization, or ODA, which has been a persistent and continuing issue for us and for me personally over the years. It must conduct unannounced audits, unannounced, to ensure compliance. It must ensure that whistleblowers feel safe to speak up and know their concerns will be addressed when they do, and that they will see the results of those concerns as expressed. And it must compel compliance when necessary. The FAA simply can't shy away from holding Boeing fully accountable when it's failing to deliver on safety. We can't wait for another tragedy to act effectively. Today, with us in the audience is a member of the Handley family who lost her mother 35 years ago when a cargo door blew off a Boeing aircraft. In a letter to the subcommittee, her family said, quote, "We recount the details of this accident that changed all our lives, to point out that 35 years later, the same issues have not been rectified. More lives have been lost. More profits have been put before people by the manufacturers, the FAA, and by the airlines." I ask without objection that that letter be made part of the record. Administrator Whitaker, it's time that all of us listen to those really powerful words of warning. It's beyond time for the FAA to take, in my view, a more proactive role. I hope that today's hearing is an opportunity for you to share the steps that you intend to take on behalf of the FAA to hold Boeing to the high standards that apply to manufacturing of aircraft. You are still less than a year into the job, and now is your moment to take that leadership role. That's why we're here today. Finally, I want to acknowledge the Boeing employees who make these aircraft and the unions that represent them. 2 weeks ago, more than 30,000 Boeing employees with the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers went on strike after rejecting Boeing's contract offer. I stand with these workers and urge Boeing and the IAM to come together to negotiate in good faith to reach a fair agreement that addresses the workers' concerns. They are the ones who make these airplanes, and they are the ones who have come forward to us. More than 15 whistleblowers already from their ranks and others, and their expressions of support for our ongoing inquiry have been immensely important to inspire and inform our work. With that, I turn to the ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just ask my written opening comments to be entered in the record. I'll just make a couple
without objection
comments. Now, I really approached this investigation, these hearings, from a somewhat different perspective. Coming from manufacturing myself, I realize it's really hard to achieve perfection, and yet that's what we all expect from Boeing. Anything less than that is fatal. There are really three main stakeholders in this saga. It's Boeing, its shareholders, its employees, the airlines, the traveling public. I guess I'm part of that group. And then, of course, you have the FAA, which is the government regulator that is, really tasked with the oversight over the whole process to keep the public safe. Obviously, airline travel is an amazingly safe endeavor. They're truly, passenger miles traveled, there's no safer method. I certainly cling to that. I like the fact that I have a live pilot in the cockpit that's taking the same risk as I am, but we all take a risk as minimal as it might be. And of course, the FAA's job, I would say Boeing's job, I would say the airline's job is all to minimize that risk, to bring it down to essentially zero. And they all have a stake, and they all want to do it. And we all want Boeing to succeed. So I guess where I do take issue with the chairman's comment where he said, pressure, sacrificing safety for profit. I don't think that's the case at all. Having an airplane fall the sky is probably the most devastating thing to profit of the airline industry, right? I think the pressure comes from all of us. The airlines want those aircraft. The public want those airlines to get those aircraft, so we have more flights available to us. So it's a generalized pressure, and I can imagine the pressure when you've had these instances, of the MAX aircraft going down. You've got to shut down production lines, the Dreamliner. I mean, that's created backlogs and enormous commercial pressure from all of us to get those production lines back up and running. Again, pressure on the FAA as well. So again, I just take a more sympathetic view of the challenge that everybody has. Now, Shelley wanted to hear from Boeing. I really wanted to hear from the airlines, because what I've been hoping that this investigation, these hearings provide is eventually, in the end, comfort and reassurance to the public that everything is being done to ensure their safety. And again, a lot is being done. I don't want people freaking out. I don't freak out when I step on an airplane, and I fly Southwest almost exclusively 737s. I hop on there. It could be a Series 700, 800 MAX. I note it, but I don't worry about it. I really don't, because I know the risk is so unbelievably minimal. But having said that, having obtained these documents, having had these hearings, I still have no idea how the MCAS system was approved. And really, seems that and lack of training with that MCAS system was the cause of the two airliners. We couldn't really get straight answers on that. So again, I think today's hearing is entirely appropriate. I think FAA has an awful lot of questions to answer. Again, with a very difficult task, but what are you doing to push the airlines, or push the, Boeing, but also the airlines? Again, I reached out to airline CEOs. I wanted them to come testify. Yeah, I realize their reluctance. I mean, unfortunately, so many of these hearings just end up trying to beat up on the private sector. I understand the challenge, but I wanted the airlines to come and defend themselves. I wanted them to provide comfort, saying, listen, if Boeing's not absolutely perfect, don't worry. We have pilots that inspect these planes. We have our maintenance schedules. We detect things. We keep the public safe. But again, they were afraid to come in here, and they weren't able to provide those assurances. I'm hoping you can provide the assurance. I hope at the end of today's hearing, we are confident, okay, the administrator's got this under control, a difficult process. Again, there's no such thing as a risk-free world, but I feel pretty confident that this is going to get under control, and the public can move forward with a great deal of confidence when they step on airplanes. Again, that's my goal here. I'm not here to beat up a company. I'm not here to beat up you. I'm just trying to get the stakeholders, the players in this, I'll call it a saga, to do their job, describe the job they're doing. If they're not doing a good enough job, describe how you're going to improve it, so that, again, we can all rest assured that the safety of our airline industry and what passengers experience is as good as it can be. With that, I'll turn it back over. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Johnson. Just for the record, I want to make clear that we have invited the airlines to come, and so far they've declined. And as the ranking member said, we want Boeing to succeed. We need Boeing to succeed. And I think we have that goal in common, and that's why the FAA's role is so critical. So we welcome you today. As many know, perhaps everyone in the room, you are the current administrator of the Federal Aviation Administrator, having been appointed in October of 2023. Prior to that role, you worked in both the public and private sector, including as the FAA's Deputy Administrator from 2013 to 2016. As you know, our custom is to swear in all the witnesses, so I'm going to ask you to rise. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. If you would proceed with your opening statement, then we'll go to questions.
Thank you, Chair Blumenthal, Ranking Member Johnson, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today. Let me first acknowledge the families and loved ones of the victims of the Ethiopian Airlines and Lion Airline accidents and other tragic air accidents of the past, and extend my deepest sympathies and condolences to them. I want to begin by stressing the importance and the availability of FAA's whistleblower and safety hotline programs. The safety and integrity of our air transportation system relies heavily on having a culture where people come forward with their safety concerns without fear of reprisal, and they have confidence in the process to know that their report will be investigated thoroughly. I want to thank the many individuals who have already reached out to our Office of Audit and Evaluation, and I strongly encourage anyone with safety concerns to report them to FAA at their hotline.faa.gov. We thoroughly evaluate every report that we receive. In addition to having our hotline program available to Boeing employees, Boeing itself must maintain a robust safety reporting program and promote a safe, proactive reporting culture within its organization. The FAA will continue to closely monitor Boeing's implementation of its ASAP program and the maturity of its Speak Up program. Boeing's manufacturing and production system is complex, spanning multiple facilities and thousands of suppliers. Because of the complexity of its operations, Boeing must have a robust safety system with multiple layers that can detect and mitigate identified risks. The FAA will hold Boeing accountable for having an effective system in place with procedures that ensure the production and delivery of safe aircraft. This past February, I directed Boeing to develop a comprehensive action plan to address its systemic quality control and production issues. This plan was required to incorporate the results of the FAA's special audit, as well as the findings and recommendations of the Section 103 panel. Boeing provided its plan to the FAA on May 30th. However, the plan does not mark the end of our oversight of Boeing and its suppliers. there must be a profound shift in the company's safety culture to holistically address its quality assurance and production challenges. Our goal is to make sure Boeing implements the necessary changes and has the right tools in place to sustain those changes in the long term. Since January 5th, we have added more safety inspectors at Boeing and Spirit facilities, and we will maintain our increased on-site presence. Our oversight activities include more direct engagement with company employees, additional inspections at critical points in the production process, and increased auditing of quality systems and processes. Our safety inspectors are also monitoring each of Boeing's sub-teams tasked with implementing the key components of the plan and are providing direct feedback to Boeing as it proposes changes. The FAA is closely reviewing the key performance indicators, or KPIs, to evaluate the health of the production system and will independently address any early indicators of risk. In addition to the work the safety inspectors are doing on production oversight, we also have hundreds of FAA personnel who are focused on other aspects of our Boeing oversight. These employees are monitoring the in-service fleet through our continued operational safety program, overseeing Boeing's ODA, and conducting certification activities. Addressing safety issues also requires the FAA to continually examine the effectiveness of our own oversight processes and make necessary improvements. We must continue to be increasingly proactive and establish a more dynamic oversight protocol that allows us to anticipate and identify risks before they manifest themselves as events. As our first step, we are reevaluating our current safety management programs and our internal safety oversight initiatives. We are also examining opportunities to leverage our vast data resources to become more predictive in identifying risks across the aviation system. To this end, the agency is undertaking a fresh look at our current capabilities to provide more real-time insight into emerging safety trends and to share relevant data across the various components of our safety ecosystem. We must all do our part to restore public confidence in our aviation system. As administrator, I have already committed to improving our own safety practices. Boeing must do the same. They must make significant changes to transform their quality system and ensure the right layers of safety are in place. I continue to be directly engaged with senior leadership to ensure Boeing executes the necessary changes to transform its safety culture and address its production quality issues. I met recently with their new CEO, Kelly Ortberg, and reemphasized our expectation that these changes must be sustained in the long term. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Administrator Whitaker. I'm going to defer my questions and yield to Senator Hassan for the first set of questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for that courtesy, and thank you and the ranking member for this hearing. Mr. Whitaker, thank you for being here today to speak about the importance of really robust safety oversight on the aviation industry. I want to start just with a question. You've just gone over a number of the things that the FAA does to exercise oversight. But Boeing is the largest airplane manufacturer in the United States. Employees at both Boeing and the FAA know how important the company is to our country's economy and to our travel, daily travel. So what will the FAA do to ensure that Boeing is subject to the same strict scrutiny as any other aviation company and is not allowed some level of privileged status or receive special treatment because of its size and importance?
Well, we've since the January 5th incident, we've substantially changed our oversight model with Boeing. So the first thing we did was cap production because we were not willing to see production go up until we were certain that each airplane was being manufactured safely. We also had previously taken away from Boeing the ability to issue airworthiness certificates. So we have to sign off on every aircraft. They present that aircraft, they tell us that there are 0 faults. We do our own inspection, and we sign off on each aircraft to make it safe. We put inspectors on the factory floor to talk to employees and actually look over their shoulders and understand what's going on the factory floor. It's a much more intensive level of engagement, and we plan to maintain that indefinitely. The goal here is a culture change at Boeing, and that is a very long-term project. And throughout this 9 months, the discussions with Boeing has been, this is a multi-year process. It's not a multi-month process.
Well, thank you for that. We are all obviously concerned, as are you and everybody at the FAA, that Boeing's safety failures have posed risk to the public, have cost lives. It's also created real and understandable doubts about aviation safety. So what is the FAA doing to improve your oversight efforts and communicate transparently with the American public about these efforts to identify and then address the public safety concerns?
Well, I think the important thing to know about air safety is we've achieved the results we've achieved by having multiple layers of safety. Yeah. So when one layer fails, you've got other layers to catch that. Well-trained pilot in the cockpit is one of those layers. A well-trained air traffic controller is one of those layers. Technology certainly provides those layers. We've tried to be very transparent on what we're doing with Boeing and the extent to which we are being much more focused on boots on the ground and reviewing the operation on a weekly and monthly basis. We have 6 performance indicators in place that are either green, yellow, or red and tell us how they're doing on these important aspects. So we're trying to have as much transparency as possible with that.
Okay. I appreciate that, and I just would urge you all to continue this kind of transparency. And I'll also note it's important to have well-trained pilots and air traffic controllers. It's also important to have enough of them so that they can work reasonable shifts and are rested and fresh when they're on duty.
Absolutely.
Last question. The FAA is responsible for the safety of civilian aircraft in the United States and thus responsible for reviewing the safety concerns with Boeing aircraft that this subcommittee and whistleblowers have brought to your agency's attention. Not only does Boeing produce commercial aircraft, it's also one of the largest producers of U.S. military aircraft. For example, some military aircraft like the KC-46, flown by the New Hampshire Air National Guard, are developed based on civilian airframes, in this case, the Boeing 767. If the FAA receives information about safety risks for civilian aircraft models, does it have a system in place to share that information with the Department of Defense so it can ensure that military aircraft are safe?
We do, ma'am. We have a relationship with DoD. They oversee the defense aspects of the aircraft, the aspects of the aircraft that are largely the same between civilian and military. We oversee. We have what's called a military certification office, and they work very closely with the Department of Defense to make sure that's a seamless handoff.
I appreciate that very much, and thank you again for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your courtesy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Hassan. I understand that Senator Johnson is going to defer to Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Johnson. Mr. Whitaker, let me start with some press reporting. I've read press claims that managers at both FAA and Boeing often agreed, I'm going to quote now, to table disagreements about technical issues in order to avoid delays, and that the relationship between your agency and Boeing was, quote, almost fraternal, end quote. Does that strike you as accurate in the time that you've been in your position?
Well, in the time that I've been in my position, and particularly since January 5th, that I would not use that to characterize the relationship, no.
Have you found, in looking back at your agency's conduct, are you worried about Boeing employees and FAA regulators being too close, potential conflicts of interest, or otherwise not the sort of rigorous oversight that's necessary being provided?
I think there have been various chapters in that relationship, and I think particularly with the development of the MCAS, some of the delegation of authorities that took place, and some of the processes in that era showed some culture problems between the two. So we're very focused on making sure that happens, and we also monitor to make sure we're not having regulatory capture and rotating our inspectors and our executives to ensure that.
Let me ask you about some whistleblower allegations. Since Mr. Calhoun testified here back in June, a number of whistleblowers have contacted my office. One whistleblower told my office that Boeing would routinely try to schedule inspections based on which FAA investigators were coming, because some FAA investigators were known to be more inclined to provide sign-offs. I think we've got a quote about this. When this whistleblower brought this up to Boeing, namely this sort of disparate treatment by different investigators, he was brought into an office and told, don't push and do whatever your career can handle. My question is, does the FAA now, or has it in the past, allow Boeing to schedule which inspections occur with specific investigators for certifying aircraft?
There are various types of inspections. Some of those are large paperwork inspections. Those tend to get scheduled. They're fairly intensive, weeks-long audits. The primary inspection happens on the floor, and particularly now that we have inspectors on the floor. I visited with the inspectors in Charleston and walked the floor with them. They have the opportunity to join the briefing meetings in the morning, the various level of management meetings, but more importantly, engage actually with the employees. So I think in this new regime we've had in place for the last 9 months, we have a much more of an ability to have a spontaneous inspection procedures and get better data that way.
Okay, so it sounds like it's a yes maybe as to paperwork inspections. As to in-person inspections, you are not currently allowing there to be scheduled inspections, is that right?
Those are more spontaneous, and in fact, if an inspector sees something he doesn't like it on the spot, he can say, can I see the paperwork? Can I talk to the person that did this, and effectively go through an inspection at that point.
Has the agency allowed scheduled inspections of any kind in the past?
Just of the audit nature, both with the quality systems for Boeing, which are basically auditing their manuals and procedures, and also similar inspections that happen with suppliers.
Let me ask you about another whistleblower report. This whistleblower, different person, told my office that she would report scores of technical issues, but when she did that, those reports were not well received by Boeing. No surprise given how Boeing has behaved. Here's the thing that particularly interested me. This whistleblower stated that if you go to the FAA, I'm going to quote her now, if you don't say you fear retaliation during an initial call with the FAA, you don't get whistleblower protection. I think we've got that quote as well. If you don't say you fear retaliation during the initial call with the FAA, you don't get whistleblower protection. Is that accurate?
That is not accurate. You get full whistleblower protection with each outreach.
Okay, so the FAA is not requiring whistleblowers to explicitly state that they fear retaliation in order to get whistleblower protection as defined by law. Is that correct?
Sir. Yes, sir.
What are you doing to ensure that any whistleblower who comes forward to you, whether from Boeing or anywhere else, is guaranteed the full whistleblower protections they are entitled to under the statute?
In 2023, we beefed up our department, added a number of inspectors, and they're all very well trained on what the protocols are. And really the key to this system working is having that confidentiality. It is really the cornerstone of the system working. So we encourage people to speak up, and we are bending over backwards to make sure they're protected.
Let me ask you about another whistleblower report. This whistleblower says that when she would go to the FAA with her concerns, these are reports of technical issues, other corner cutting by Boeing, that she often got relegated to an undesirable role. In other words, she was retaliated against. In one example, for instance, she did not receive overtime in her new role, which resulted in a $30,000 pay hit. And this whistleblower alleged Boeing routinely conducts retaliation in this way without raising any formal alarm bells. In other words, tries to retaliate, but sort of on the sly, as it were, and evade any FAA accountability or scrutiny. Are you aware of things like this happening?
I'm aware of allegations of retaliation, and it has been a focus as we look at the safety culture change that has to happen. A key part of that is a robust whistleblower program that does not have retaliation. That's going to involve training of management so they know how to treat employees. And anytime we get an allegation of retaliation, we bring in the Department of Labor and OSHA to investigate as well.
And so has that happened recently? I mean, are you investigating? Have you brought in other relevant federal agencies to investigate possible cases of retaliation as it relates to Boeing?
We routinely would bring in the Department of Labor if there's a retaliation allegation.
You say routinely, but I guess I'm looking for, as it relates to Boeing, while you have been in your role, have there been instances where you've had to go after them for potential retaliation?
I can get that information and provide it to your office.
Okay, that would be helpful. In my time remaining here, let me just ask about something you testified to back in June when you were before the Commerce Committee. You were talking about changing your approach to inspecting Boeing production facilities. But one former FAA official has commented that 150 inspectors is a drop in the bucket compared to the amount of work that goes on at a typical Boeing production facility. Boeing says they have 170,000 employees. The Boeing facility in Renton, Washington, for example, where the 737s are produced, has 1 million square feet. How many inspectors do you have on the floor at Renton, for example?
I could give you the precise number. We currently have 11, and by the end of the year, we plan to have 13 inspectors there.
So you have 11 on a floor of 1 million square feet. There are 12,000 employees at Renton. Are those numbers adequate?
Our current assessment is this is a good start, and these inspectors are able to walk the line and talk to employees, and we feel like we're pretty well covered, but we will continue to evaluate that number as we go forward.
Well, my time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Johnson, for allowing me to ask these questions. I just want to say in closing that, listen, what's happened at Boeing is absolutely unacceptable. As I said to the CEO when he was sitting right where you are, for the CEO to have gotten a 45% pay increase as he did year over year while he wasn't paying his machinists out in the Pacific Northwest, while his planes are literally falling out of the sky, is absolutely reprehensible. They are destroying, he is destroying a great American company, and I don't buy this stuff that Boeing has a culture problem. Boeing has a leadership problem, and I just want to make sure, Mr. Whitaker, I'm glad you're doing the job you're doing. I want to make sure your agency is holding their feet to the fire. I worry about these reports that there's this sort of fratty culture between the FAA and Boeing. We need tough oversight there, and we're counting on you to provide that because, frankly, the American public deserve it when they get into an airplane, and the good people who work for Boeing deserve to be protected. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Hawley. Senator Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, you and the ranking member for having today's hearings, continuing this very important conversation. Director Whitaker, thank you for the work that you're doing. I want to pick up a little bit on Senator Hawley's sort of line of questioning around the inspectors on the floor, the sort of ratios, and so how confident are you in getting that right? We know that following the door plug incident in the Alaskan Airlines plane in January, we referred to it as the January 5th incident here. But the FAA has talked a lot about deploying more inspectors to the Boeing plants across the country. I think we just talked specifically about one in particular. Can you just, in the aggregate, tell us how many inspectors that have been deployed across Boeing manufacturing facilities, and how does that compare to the January 5th incident?
Thank you, Senator. So pre-January 5th, our focus was not on actual boots-on-the-ground inspection. It was much more of an audit approach and not intermingling our staff with what was going on the floor. So that was a big change we made after January 5th. I have visited a couple of these facilities and walked with the inspectors. The total target, to answer your direct question, is 55 by the end of the year. We're at 46 right now, and we expect to hit the 55. Basically, it's 13 in any of the three big Boeing facilities, and then 16 in various supplier facilities. And the way it typically works is they walk from station to station. They talk with the people who are doing the work. When they have questions, they ask them to show them where their work instructions are and where their tools are. And right now, we feel like that gives us a pretty good visibility into the factory. We get this question a lot, is that enough? And I've gone back several times and said, are we sure this is enough? And so we are continuing to monitor that. But right now, we feel like we're getting pretty good engagement, but we will up that number if we need to.
Well, let's talk about that engagement, because I just want to understand, like, what does that mean? Like, when someone is asked to perform a duty or a task, there's a concrete outcome that is being expected that defines success. So can you talk to us a little bit about what concrete results do you expect from these investigators? Maybe that'll help us all understand whether 11 is enough.
So a typical investigator would join in the morning meetings as a shift starts, where they talk about problems that may have been on the line or areas of focus. They'll focus on key inspection points or key issues that have come up in audits to see how the employees are doing, whether they feel like they've got enough training and enough tools to do their work. Boeing is deploying, as part of the comprehensive plan, a new tool tracking technology and a new part tracking technology. So those are pilot programs that are rolling out, so the employees are being trained on that, and they're watching how that program rolls out as well.
So if I heard you correctly, they are expected to go to meetings, review audits, and talk to employees. I don't want to oversimplify it. I just want to make sure that I'm getting it get it accurate?
I mean, that's in addition to their normal certification duties, which are structuring the audits and filling out the forms related to audits and that type of thing, yes.
Okay, and so how do you then take those specific outcomes and turn them into signals, reports, feedback? How do you take what you're experiencing or what you're learning through those investigators, through their sort of 3 focused areas of return for the agency, and then turn that into something that ensures greater confidence for the public? Help us understand A, B, and C, which is where the ultimate end is greater public confidence in the product that Boeing is putting out.
So the inspectors would hold weekly meetings with the management. They would give feedback on what their findings are, and they would have an exchange on that. And then their findings also would be plugged into future audits. So if they're seeing areas of concern, they know where they can move their focus going forward.
So get me to the end product, because what I'm trying to figure out, Director, is one of, not the only, but one of the big changes, big shifts since the January 5th incident is the deployment, the shift in strategy at the FAA in its oversight, the biggest shift being the deployment of these inspectors. If this is the biggest strategic shift that the oversight agency is making, how do we get from how are we assessing whether or not this was the right strategic shift and communicating that then to the American public, to airlines, to oversight bodies like this? What is it exactly that these inspectors, that we're learning from these inspectors? Maybe I can phrase it that way. What are we learning from these inspectors in the 3 things that you've asked them to do? Go to the meeting, review the audits, talk to the employees. How is that conferring to greater public confidence and stronger oversight? I'm just trying to, again, understand this is the biggest shift that you made. And one of, I understand many, but I do want to understand it's the biggest shift that you made. How does that get us to the end point that we want, which is the greater confidence, a stronger product, and better protected workers?
Well, let me back up a bit. I wouldn't necessarily characterize it as the biggest shift that we made. It's one of a number of changes, and I think one of the key things that we do now is we have these 6 key performance index metrics that we're monitoring constantly. We monitor them on a weekly basis. Those 6 metrics tie directly into the comprehensive plan and tell us how Boeing is doing on the comprehensive plan, and that deals with things like employee training. It deals with things like traveled work, work that's done out of order, work that has to be redone. So we can actually measure the quality of the production line through these 6 metrics. The work that the inspectors do is very linked to that. Their feedback goes into those metrics. And those metrics are also tied to the production cap that we've put in place. So I would say that the changes that have been put in place for Boeing and oversight are pretty widespread, and the inspectors on the ground are one part of that, but they feed into the other pieces of the plan. But
my time has expired. I just want to make the point that we don't know, the inspectors are the only eyes and ears that you've articulated that actually help us to assess whether any of those other things are actually being met. And so if I just wanted to help the people here and this subcommittee understand, if this is the biggest single investment into making all of this other stuff work, how is it that we are measuring the success, concretely, how are we measuring the success of this big strategic shift or tactical shift, if that's a better way to describe it, that then flows into all of the rest of the accountability metrics that we're holding to Boeing? I understand my time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I just would love to follow up with you, Director, to understand that better.
Happy to do that.
Thanks, Senator Butler. We've been talking a little bit about inspectors. Those 11 inspectors were designated in reaction to the January 5th incident, correct?
They were part of the holistic response to the January 5th.
So it was essentially reactive.
Yes.
those 11 inspectors are for the Renton plant, or are there others for other plants?
So by end of year, we'll have 13 in Renton, in Everett, and in Charleston each.
Now, Renton is 1.1 million square feet with 12,000 employees. Those 11 inspectors are just a token force, correct?
They're not actually, they're not there to run the quality system. They're there to oversee the quality system. So they're able to, that number of inspectors allows them to go to each station. So there are, I think, a dozen stations in the build process, and talk to the employees that are working on
So
those.
they don't actually do the kind of hands-on quality control. You're still depending on Boeing employees to look at the parts, to review the assembly, to watch what's going on. We continue to have the delegation of that authority to Boeing employees, correct?
It's not a delegation of authority. The manufacturer is responsible for the quality assurance system and the quality management system. The inspectors are there to make sure they have a robust quality management system and it's functioning. And the KPIs that we look at every week are telling us whether that's working or not working.
So they are not really responsible for the quality inspections, the actual hands-on.
The actual inspections are done by the Boeing quality inspectors. And for the 737 MAX, there are close to 1,600 inspection points that happen during construction. And that's done by Boeing employees, and we provide oversight into that process.
Hence, there is validity to the claims of whistleblowers who come to us and say, you know, mechanics are looking at the guy next to them as quality control. That's the quality control, or reviewing their own work.
Well, certainly for key inspections, they always get two sets of eyes. So that for matters around fit and finish, form and function, those always have two sets of eyes. There are some inspections that are done by the people that complete the work, but not the crucial inspections.
This ODA, or inspection, and the system has been controversial for some time, as you know. And I think that the 13 inspectors who will be there by the end of the year are inadequate to the task of really assuring the public that there is quality control by an objective and independent entity. That's just a fact of life. If it's Boeing employees looking at their own colleagues' work, it's very different from an FAA quality inspection. And I think that number, as I think you have acknowledged, is not sufficient to cover that kind of quality control. Let me just go into the January 5th incident. After that door plug blew out, you said, quote, the FAA should have had much better visibility into what was happening at Boeing before January 5th. One of the FAA officials interviewed by the NTSB as part of its investigation of the January incident said that FAA's relationship with Boeing was positive. One said it was, quote, excellent. Another said it was, quote, open, honest, transparent, and timely. Are you satisfied that the relationship with Boeing now is open, honest, transparent, and timely?
I don't rely on the relationship being any of those things. It's more of a verification approach, which is why we have the inspectors on the ground and why we have the key performance metrics that we can measure going forward. These are very objective outcomes of the production process and give us a very clear picture of the health of that system. But to your earlier point, the system was too reactive, and I think overall with the oversight system that we've had, it's been too static and not dynamic enough to adjust to circumstances that change. So it may stay in place until it doesn't work anymore, and that's not the right approach. It needs to change as circumstances change. So we're revisiting that approach, not just for the overseeing manufacturers, but all aspects of the national airspace.
I think you testified that you foresee changes in Boeing, and especially in its safety culture, coming at some point, perhaps years from now. Doesn't it have to be like weeks from now? Isn't there an urgency here?
Well,
Isn't this company seriously in jeopardy?
I think that change management with a company with 170,000 employees takes a long time. So the comprehensive plan has a lot of front loading on things that can be done quickly, like the tool and parts tracking technology that's most manufacturers would have had already. They bring that up to our current standards.
But just to interrupt, and I apologize, Boeing has been promising these changes for a long time, right? I mean, yes, cultural change does take time, but Boeing, going back years now, would have been criminally charged, except it promised change. And it was spared that prosecution on that promise. It broke the promise. And now it's being criminally prosecuted. Why hasn't the FAA said, you were on probation in effect, you have to do it now?
So I think we effectively have by capping production. So they cannot grow to where they need to grow without having these 6 metrics in the green, stable, and a plan to grow safely. And I think that's the big difference between now and previous efforts. If they don't do that, they don't grow. And if they don't grow, they're not going to be able to achieve profitability. So I think we do have the right strictures in place to make this happen. I think it would be not possible to have company-wide culture change in a matter of months. I think it's going to take years. I think those employees that you surveyed, a lot of them aren't going to believe it until they've seen it for years. They need to hear it from their leaders. They need to hear it from the vice presidents. They need to hear it from the mid-level managements, and they need to hear it for years. So we know that takes a long time. But there are a lot of aspects of this that have been rolled out and are being rolled out. Safety management is also another thing that should not take as long as is indicated, 2027, and we are going to work to try to accelerate that as one of the conditions of this plan. But it takes a long time to get that. That's part of the culture of safety, and it takes a long time to change that safety.
Well, my time has expired on this round. I'd like to pursue some of these questions. I respect that you sought to answer them, and I'll follow them. But let me just say, I'm not a business school graduate or a business CEO, but this company has had a lot of time to achieve change, a lot of time. And the ranking member is partly correct that maybe perfection can't be achieved, but it has to be the goal when you put an airplane up in the air. We ought to have zero tolerance for risk to the extent we can eliminate it. In other words, needless risk when you manufacture an airplane is reckless. Maybe not when you make a pen. There is a margin of error when you make a pen. If it doesn't work, I'll get another one. If the airplane isn't working up in the air, people die, and people have died. And so I'm going to yield to the ranking member. Thank you.
So I guess I'll take partially correct. You know, listen, I come at this with a different perspective. I ran a manufacturing plant for 30 years. We supplied the medical device industry. We had all kinds of quality audits. We had, quality systems in place. I understand them. And there is a point of diminishing returns here, too. You have somebody check the quality control person, and who's going to check the checker? And then who's going to check the checker of the checker? So, again, you had to put in reasonable systems. I appreciate the questioning of my colleagues trying to find out, okay, what do these inspectors do? I'll drill down a little bit further. First of all, I would think FAA would rely on the fact that we've got these inspectors walking around. If there's really a problem, you would hope Boeing employees would come up to an inspector and mention something. First of all, does that happen quite frequently?
I think the sense is that they have felt unwilling to do that. So working on that change so they feel more welcome to do that, which is why we've given them multiple outlets to do it.
Do you know of instances of retaliation against Boeing employees when they've approached FAA inspector?
I don't know of specific incidents, no.
Do you get the sense that currently at Boeing, there's a hostility toward FAA inspectors or a sense of cooperation or something between that?
I suspect you might find all of those range of reactions, but our inspectors are reporting that they're finding a cooperative attitude, but they're primarily focused on understanding what's going on the floor and talking to employees.
Is there a difference in general attitude between manufacturing sites? I mean, is one of the manufacturing sites better? Are they coming up to speed quicker? Are they engaging in that cultural change quicker than others?
The only thing I can comment on that is this comprehensive plan has rolled out with the 737 on those particular sites, but it is now being rolled out in all of the lines as well to cover all their models.
How many different inspections are there, let's say, on a particular airliner? Do you have any idea?
So the 737 has almost 1,600 inspections in the quality inspections in the manufacturing process.
So how many of those would be 100% inspection versus like some kind of statistical sampling?
I can come back to you with that information.
Is that something the FAA agrees on with Boeing? Is that something you discuss?
It is part of the quality plan that Boeing puts together, and we do review that plan.
Do you basically agree with it at this point in time?
They have added about 30% more inspection points over the last couple of years, so we do agree with that, yes.
Okay. I mean, that's the way the system's it has to work. I mean, you can't have layer after layer after layer. At some point in time, you have to rely on a system, and really the proof's in the pudding. One of the things I was disappointed with the airline CEOs not coming in here, again, I wanted somebody to talk about the safety record. Again, I don't have the stats in front of me, but it always seemed like there were, these airline disasters occurred in threes. I mean, we literally have not had an airline disaster in quite some time. And other than really the 737 MAX, which I want to get into, I mean, do you have the safety stats? Can you spout those off to us today? Or?
As far as major air accidents?
Yeah, I mean, passenger safety per traveled mile. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything close to airline travel, is there?
No, I think in the U.S. it's been about 15 years since a major U.S. accident.
But again, just miles traveled, it's the safest way to go.
Yeah.
You're a lot safer in an airplane than you are in a car.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning that the airlines have been engaging more with Boeing. Many of them have put inspectors in the plant, so they also have inspectors walking the floor.
That's what I wanted to hear from the airline industry. Now, what are you doing to check your supplier? What are you doing in terms of your maintenance? Again, I still encourage them to come forward. Yep. The goal of this is to help Boeing succeed and restore confidence in the traveling public. I do want to cover the 737, the MCAS system, because I still don't understand that. I mean, you had the Lion Air crash in October 2018. 4.5 months later, you had the Ethiopian crash. Having read this in hindsight, it seemed like that MCAS system was a real challenge, and people knew that this was an issue, correct?
So I, of course, wasn't there at the time, but I have had to do a fair amount of digging into that, and I know it's been very well investigated. And I think the consensus is that Boeing withheld important safety information from the FAA during the certification process. And had that been...
Okay, again, you weren't there, so you're not going to get blamed for this. Do you think the FAA was not aggressive enough or firm enough? Was there too cozy a relationship? Was this industry capture of a regulatory agency that Boeing felt they could withhold that information?
My understanding was it was a deliberate withholding of information, so there's no indication that anyone at FAA had knowledge of it.
I understand they didn't have knowledge of it, but again, was that because there's just too cozy a relationship that Boeing thought they could get away with it?
Not my impression.
So what has changed now? Because they still are employing the MCAS system, correct?
So the MCAS system went through a number of technical changes, and I think the big change was pilot training, because the pilots were unaware of how this system operated.
That MCAS system basically caused those airlines to nosedive, right? And one of the reasons they didn't have one of the indicators, I mean, those airliners cut some corners, and they ordered their planes with only one of these, was it airspeed indicator? I mean, one of the indicators, correct?
Angle of attack indicator, and best practices would have been to have a redundant system in manufacture, yes.
So now that's required, correct?
Yes.
Has there been an upgrade to the software itself significant so that the training is easier, so it doesn't rely so much on, again, this is kind of what's it stand for? Mechanical, I wrote it down here somewhere. But it's really about an automated system. I mean, an automated system that requires extensive pilot training to prevent it from nosediving into the ground is not a very good automated system. I mean, have they improved that thing?
Well, I don't have great detail on that. I understand there were software updates, of redundant systems on the angle of attack indicator, and extensive pilot training.
Well, I'll point it out to you, to Boeing, to the airlines. I would like to understand this, seeing as I fly these things quite a bit. I still don't understand it. I still don't understand what they did to give me the complete confidence going, okay, they have this totally fixed. So I would like that if you could,
We can
do that
provide
from
you
the
with-
FAA's perspective, kind of lay it out for us, issue a report. Again, the goal here is to provide the confidence to the public, because we've actually corrected these problems, and we agree that these problems have been corrected.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much.
Senator Hassan.
Just picking up there for a moment on MCAS, do I recall correctly that not only had FAA not been informed of the scope of the system and the certification process, but also the carriers and flight crews had not been fully briefed or briefed at all on the functioning of the system?
That's my understanding, Senator.
And was the decision not to inform flight crews of how the system functioned linked to the decision to withhold information from FAA?
I don't know that they were necessarily linked, but my understanding was there were economic considerations that if pilot training was required, there were financial penalties, and that drove part of that decision-making.
Penalties imposed by?
My understanding, it was an aircraft order contract between Southwest and Boeing.
Who at Boeing made the decision to withhold that information from FAA, and who at Boeing made that decision not to inform carriers and flight crews of how the system functioned?
So I was in the private sector during that time, so I wasn't involved in the particular instance. I don't have that level of detail, but we can certainly
But
provide.
FAA must, right?
We have information we can certainly provide, sir.
Okay. Will you provide that to the subcommittee, please?
Yes, we will.
You mentioned that the FAA's oversight became, I think the words you used were too reactive, too passive, unable to adapt to change. What kind of change would the FAA have been able to adapt to had it been more agile in this case?
With respect to the January 5th incident?
With respect to your oversight of Boeing quality control over the last decade? And every time I say your, I know you haven't been there for 10 years, and you joined last year. So.
I think when I talk about technology evolution, I'm talking about some of the technology in the cockpit. For example, there have been advancement in auto landing technology, advancements in technology in types of aircraft that we're seeing. So we're starting to see new forms of aircraft like advanced air mobility. We're seeing drones. We're seeing supersonic flight. So all these technological changes are presenting challenges, and our system needs to be flexible enough to adapt to those challenges.
But a lack of visibility into potential decline in quality control related to the incidents that this subcommittee has been focused on have not been related to these sort of high-profile next-generation evolutions of technology, right? It's about whether or not the manufacturer and its contractors have been implementing best industrial practices, correct?
It is, and I think in that situation, we're really talking about utilizing better data to have a better idea of what's actually going on the factory floor.
What kind of data would have revealed to the FAA, had it been collected, that you needed a more aggressive approach to examine the industrial processes?
So since the January 5th incident, when we asked Boeing to put together this comprehensive plan, there are now 6 key performance indicators that we monitor constantly that tell us how they're doing on traveled work, on employee training, on ticketed items at the end of production. Those metrics give us a very clear picture of the health of the company. So if those metrics move into the yellow, we know there's a concern. If they move into the red, we know we have a serious concern.
And when you look retrospectively at the period of concern, was there a decline in those metrics?
We just started the metrics this year.
Well, how'd you determine that those are the things that you needed to track?
We looked for metrics that would reinforce the comprehensive plan. So there were certain changes we wanted to make, and for traveled work is a perfect example because that was a big
Forgive me,
issue.
Administrator, here's what I'm driving at. You said that FAA was too static or passive in its oversight, that it was unable to adapt to change. What specific change at Boeing or its suppliers was FAA unable to either identify or able to identify and unable to adapt to?
Well, I think in this particular case, the degradation of the quality management and safety management system.
When you certify the airworthiness of an aircraft, you are also certifying the production line, is that correct?
No, I mean, the production line has been certified.
So when changes are made to the production line, when changes are made to manufacturing processes, but the airframe has not changed, are you alerted to that? Does that trigger some kind of inspection or examination or recertification related either to the airframe or to the production line?
It depends on the magnitude of the change, but there should be, a manufacturer would have a risk analysis process that would run, and that would happen before any changes were made, and we would have visibility into that.
There have been some high-profile, catastrophic Airbus accidents in the last 15 years. Air France disaster related to the design of the flight control inputs for the 2 pilots and a stall that resulted. So there have been significant safety concerns as well on the other side of the Atlantic. How does the European approach to fulfilling the same obligations that you have for safety differ from the U.S. approach? In what ways might it be better, and in what ways might it be inferior?
I don't know. I don't have specifics to share with you on that. I can say that we do benchmark against, for example, number of airworthiness directives and that type of thing, and we seem to be largely tracking along the same lines. But I can follow up with any additional information.
You don't have a sense of how, philosophically or by design or the structure of your authorities, EASA or FAA take different or similar approaches to certification and inspection?
I don't, but I can follow up with you on that.
Okay. Obviously, civil aviation safety, very important in Georgia. 100 million passengers went through Hartsfield-Jackson last year. This matters a lot to my constituents. Does what's happened at Boeing in recent years reflect operational or management failures at FAA?
It depends on what you're referring to specifically. I think with MCAS, I wouldn't necessarily say so, but we did not have
I think what I'm referring to, so I think that the events that we're, the chairman, the scope of the inquiry, as I understand it, we have MCAS with failure to disclose to FAA and failure to disclose to carriers and flight crews, and we have, I think, evidence of quality control failures, as well as the accumulation of a culture that made it difficult for leadership or regulators to understand where corners are being cut. Is that a fair characterization, Mr. Chairman?
I think it certainly is.
So is the fact that that happened, or is alleged to have happened or may have happened, does that reflect a failure or potential failure by the FAA?
It's certainly enough of a circumstance to cause me to relook at how we're doing oversight and try to improve that.
Thank you, Administrator.
Thanks, Senator Ossoff. Well, in fact, the FAA and yourself acknowledge that there need to be changes and reforms to make the FAA a stronger oversight mechanism.
It's a major priority of mine, yes.
I want to come back to how you do that in terms of compelling culture change. And you mentioned that Boeing is under a cap 38 aircraft a month. In 2018, Boeing built as many as 52 planes per month. But that production rate was significantly impacted by supply chain disruption during the pandemic. And since then, Boeing's rate of 737 production was significantly lower, as you know. In fact, on average in 2013, Boeing produced about 21 planes per month. So 38 planes per month is well above what they would be producing anyway. How is that a kind of disciplinary measure?
So we have the cap in place to drive the kind of analysis and work that a safety management system would normally produce. So at this point in time,
But they're not producing fewer airplanes than they would otherwise. How does the cap get their attention, so to speak?
because Boeing is quite aware that they're not going to increase production on any of these aircraft that are now being measured with these 6 KPIs, unless those KPIs are in the green and they're stable and they have a plan for growth that's in the green. And that's the kind of behavior you would expect from a company with a robust SMS system.
But wouldn't it be more effective if it were significantly lower?
We haven't seen a need to lower that. Boeing lowered production on their own, which we wanted to encourage. We didn't want them to feel like they had to keep the number high. But having said that, we are in the state now where we are monitoring these KPIs with them on a weekly and monthly basis, and they're very aware that they need to keep those in the green to produce more aircraft.
Well, I would submit culture change is not going to come with these kinds of, forgive me, half measures that in effect impose some hypothetical cap that the company is nowhere near meeting for years and years. You won't have change when the effect of the cap won't be felt for years and years. What other measures can you do to achieve culture change?
Well, the culture change is going to come through a lot of employee outreach and education programs. And
But you don't do education.
we don't, but we oversee their efforts in this regard, and that's part of the comprehensive plan.
Well, let me submit, and I'm going to take a page from Senator Hawley's book here. If the CEO had his compensation capped, or hers, and if those caps applied to management across the board and deep into management until culture change were achieved, rather than some imaginary cap that will apply only years from now, wouldn't that have more of effect, that is capping compensation and making it conditional on culture change?
And that would certainly be beyond my authorities to implement. But what I can assure you is that Boeing will not be permitted to increase production on aircraft until those KPIs are in the green and stable.
But if you set a lower production rate and you said to shareholders, the only way you're going to increase production rate from 5 aircraft a month is to cap employee compensation, and you can do that right away, or you said that to the CEO, you might not be able to direct it or order it, but it would get their attention.
Yes, sir.
I'm just saying, there are other ways perhaps that the FAA can be proactive and aggressive rather than reactive, in my view.
And we'll certainly look at that.
More than a decade ago, the FAA proposed a fine against Boeing, as you probably know, for installing what are known as non-conforming parts. They're parts that don't meet the design or quality specifications. In 2021, the FAA settled several enforcement actions with Boeing, again, for installing non-conforming parts on aircraft. In June, this subcommittee shared accounts from whistleblowers, including Sam Mohawk. He's currently a Boeing quality assurance investigator in Renton, alleging these practices are still occurring, that is, the use of non-conforming parts. The memo we released earlier today validates what those whistleblowers have been saying. The special audit conducted by the FAA earlier this year found several instances of alleged noncompliance relating to Boeing and its supplier, Spirit Aerosystems, practices of documenting and handling non-conforming parts. Could you tell us what actions, if any, did the FAA require as a result of the alleged non-compliance during the special audit, and were those actions completed?
So with respect to whistleblower complaints, of course, those matters get investigated separately, but the part management generally was a finding of the audits, and as was tool management. In both of these areas, there are technologies that allow significant improvement in how these things are tracked, both tools and parts, and Boeing is deploying those technologies as part of the comprehensive plan.
What assurance have you received that they're employing those technologies? Because I'll tell you, according to the letter that I received just yesterday from Sam Mohawk, and I'm going to make it part of the record without objection, Boeing still hasn't complied with the year-old FAA order intended to address some of the non-conforming parts issues. So my question is what you're going to do to make them comply.
Yeah, happy to look at that information. My understanding is that the part and tool technology is being piloted now on the factory floor, but that of course has come to a halt with the work stoppage that's in place. But the plan was to complete the pilot program and then roll it out system-wide.
So it's only a pilot program so far?
It's any new technology like this would start as a pilot and then be rolled out after the bugs are out of it.
Has the FAA ever considered suspending Boeing's production certificate?
What we have done is take away the right to write airworthiness certificates. So that's the thing that gives us the most control over the aircraft, not only in making sure that we control the rate, but it also has Boeing giving us an aircraft that they're declaring to be complete, and then we do a separate inspection to re-inspect the aircraft.
Let me ask you about whistleblowers. We've heard from more than 15 of them over the course of just this investigation, and there are many more complaints before the FAA about behavior that they've witnessed or practices that they saw occur in Boeing. Many of these whistleblowers are not informed about the results of investigations that are conducted as a result of their complaints made to the FAA. They have to submit an FOI request, and it takes at least 9 months, sometimes longer. Why did the FAA decide that whistleblowers were no longer entitled to the results of investigations spurred by their complaints?
My understanding of the process is that is there to protect not only the outcome, but the identity of witnesses interviewed and the like. But I'm happy to take that back and see if there are ways to make that process work better.
Well, the identity of witnesses could always be redacted, right? And to the extent there are other kinds of classified information or whatever, it could be removed as well. But to give them no results unless they file an FOI seems counterproductive because it discourages them from coming forward, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a fair point, and I will take that as a to-do.
I know you have the authority to conduct unannounced audits, don't you?
We do.
Do you routinely?
There are various types of audits. The kind that are largely paperwork audits, reviewing quality assurance manuals and the like, tend to be scheduled so that we can get all the paperwork and the right people in the room. The audits that take place on the floor of business processes and the like tend to be unscheduled.
But you routinely give Boeing notice before the audits. I'm told that no less than 48 hours.
They can be spontaneous. We do audits with no notice.
How often?
I can try to get a breakdown for you on that.
I would appreciate it because I'm told that that all of the audits, in fact, are done with prior notice to Boeing, and the result is that, in effect, they clean up their act.
No, I do know that there are audits that happen just from walking the floor. If an inspector sees something, he can go over and ask to see where are your business instructions and what's the source data and where are the tools and all those types of things. So that they do happen spontaneously, and that's one of the advantages of having inspectors on the floor.
Let me ask you, do you look for or investigate retaliation when it's alleged by Boeing whistleblowers?
If there are allegations of retaliation, we refer those to the Department of Labor, who does an investigation. But we are certainly emphasizing with Boeing that there needs to be a non-retaliatory, non-punitive process in place to have that safety culture that they need.
Does the FAA consider retaliation in its assessment of Boeing's safety culture?
Absolutely.
And do you agree that retaliation has an impact on whether future whistleblowers come forward?
Absolutely.
When was the last time you took action against Boeing because of retaliation?
I think that rests with the Department of Labor for specific acts of retaliation.
I'm sorry, the Department of...
The Department of Labor investigates retaliatory actions.
And you refer those cases?
We refer those, yes.
How many have you referred?
I'll have to get that information for you.
Well, I would appreciate that because, you know, again, part of the whistleblower complaints to us have been that the FAA has failed to consider retaliation as part of the safety culture and has failed to take action when retaliation has happened. So I would appreciate that additional information.
I will do that.
And again, also the information about unannounced audits,
Yes, sir.
how often and whether it's a matter of policy that you do it. Have you looked at alternatives to ODA?
So ODA is happens mostly on the design and certification, in the design and certification process. There's actually fairly limited designation of authority in the production process itself. The most significant delegation of authority happens with the right to issue airworthiness certificates, and we have revoked that from Boeing.
As you know, I authored a number of provisions that were included in the Aircraft Certification, Safety, and Accountability Act, which included one provision to study ODA and, among other things, identify improvements to ODA or options for transition to an alternative certification program. And Congress mandated an expert panel review of ODA. I was disappointed and didn't mandate that there be alternatives to ODA considered. The expert panel, though, concluded and released a pretty scathing report detailing 9 recommendations for the FAA to carry out of more than 50. In February, you testified before the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, quote, "We've tasked Meter to give us a view on what the options are. I think it's important that we look at all options on the table and understand how do we make changes that are going to give us a different result than we've had." Has that study been completed, and will you commit to sharing its results with us?
That study has not been completed, but I will certainly share those results with you.
What is the status of the implementation of the 9 recommendations?
I don't have information on that, but I will also provide that to you.
Is the FAA planning any additional changes in oversight of Boeing based on the expert panel's recommendations?
There have been a number of panels. The Part 103 panel has come up with a series of recommendations as well, and all of those recommendations have informed the comprehensive plan. But that plan is also a living document, so we're always looking for improvements or other ways that we can improve oversight.
You mentioned that Boeing has a comprehensive safety plan. It was submitted to the FAA in May of this year. I am a little bit skeptical that Boeing's plan will make any meaningful improvement unless there is strong oversight and intervention by the FAA. That culture change simply isn't going to come without a significant push by the FAA. And that safety plan contains recycled information and more promises, empty commitments Boeing has made for years. For example, testimony to the NTSB confirmed that the, quote, key performance indicators, which you mentioned, are comprised of data that Boeing has had and tracked for years, and the FAA reached a settlement agreement with Boeing in 2015 that included many of the exact same commitments. Boeing is simply recycling its safety plan. Why does the FAA think Boeing will do anything different if it's simply recycling the same promises and commitments?
So it's a valid question, and I think it's not surprising that it's some of the same KPIs because it's some of the same problems that exist at Boeing that existed before. That's why we're doing some things differently this time with the inspectors on the ground, with the KPIs, and with the production caps. And of course, the Department of Justice is also looking at installing a monitor to ensure compliance. So we are aware of the failures last time and in previous times, and we intend to hold them to this.
Well, what I would appreciate from you is an action plan, a set of requirements that maybe look like they can't be fulfilled under the current trajectory of quality and safety, because they are more demanding than business as usual. I think that the business as usual approach, the reactive approach, is doomed to failure. And you have an opportunity, in fact, a moment here, as still a new administrator dealing with a new world for Boeing, because it is a company that is staring into the abyss of possible failure. And it's a crisis of its own making, not the thousands of hardworking, skilled people on the assembly lines, but its management. And in fact, those workers on the assembly line deserve better from management, and so does the traveling public, because even if they are close to highly skilled production at this point, the traveling public may still have doubts, and that will undermine the confidence of airline travel as a whole. So I am hoping that we can hear from you about more specifics. Some of it you've promised to provide. I am still looking for alternatives to ODA. I know that the FAA has revoked Boeing's ability to issue airworthy certificates for the 737 and 787 aircraft, meaning that at the end of each aircraft's assembly process, you, the FAA, not Boeing ODA employees, decide whether to allow the aircraft to enter service. But I still have serious concerns about the independence of Boeing's ODA employees, the independence, not their skills or competence, but their objectivity and independence if they're paid by Boeing, even when the FAA performs the final inspection. What I don't understand, maybe you can explain, how can FAA airworthiness inspection at the end of all the manufacturing process catch problems that occurred during the build process on the assembly floor if they're not detected in real time at that point?
Well, there's a fairly extensive checklist that they go through with each aircraft. So that does include some invasive testing and examination, but particularly being able to get underneath the passenger area and up above, they're able to do a pretty thorough inspection.
I'm also still concerned about whistleblower protections. I think the FAA needs to do more and do it more quickly and more effectively. We've talked a little bit about how it can. And I'm hopeful that the information about audits and whether there's prior notice will be forthcoming. You've agreed to provide it. I think that none of us want Boeing to fail. On the contrary, we want Boeing's success. We need it, as I said earlier. And the FAA has a vital role in safety, as you well know, but I think being more aggressive and proactive and forcing a change in culture means the FAA sometimes has to be the bad guy here. It has to compel change and make sure that we're not just recycling past commitments and promises that have proved to be empty at the end of the day.
Yes,
So
sir.
thank you very much. Really appreciate your being here. The ranking member promised that we wouldn't beat up on you. And we are on the same team, I hope, insofar as we have the same objective. But our investigation will continue, and we hope the FAA will be a positive partner in this effort.
Absolutely, sir. No, we will do that, and we've got a list of follow-ups, so we'll communicate with your staff.
Thank you. This record will remain open for 15 days for any additional comments or questions by any of the subcommittee members. Senator Butler indicated she might have some, and my other colleagues may as well. And again, my thanks for being here, Administrator Whitaker.
Great.
Thank you, and with that, the hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.